When they returned to the room, he went straight over to the fire. He paid no attention to the teacher. The latter, sitting at the table, drew out his watch and said, "It's getting late." "I know, but we're completely agreed at last," said Frida. "We accept the post." "Good," said the teacher. "But the post is offered to the land surveyor. He must say the word himself." Frida came to Kay's help. "Really," she said. "He accepts the post. Don't you, Kay?" So Kay could confine his declaration to a simple yes, which was not even directed to the teacher, but to Frida. "Then," said the teacher, "the only thing that remains for me is to acquaint you with your duties, so that in that respect we can understand each other once and for all. You have, land surveyor, to clean and heat both classrooms daily, to make any small repairs in the house, further to look after the class and the gymnastic apparatus personally, to keep the garden path free of snow, run messages for me and the lady teacher, and look after all the work in the garden in the warmer seasons of the year. In return for that, you have the right to live in whichever one of the classrooms you like. But when both rooms are not being used at the same time for teaching, and you are in the room that is needed, you must of course move to the other room. You mustn't do any cooking in the school. In return, you and your dependents will be given your meals here in the inn at the cost of the town council. That you must behave in a manner consonant with the dignity of the school, and in particular that the children during school hours must never be allowed to witness any unedifying matrimonial scenes. I mention only in passing, for as an educated man, you must of course know that. In connection with that, I want to say further that we must insist on your relations with Fraulein Frida being legitimized at the earliest possible moment. About all this and a few other trifling matters, an agreement will be made out, which as soon as you move over to the school must be signed by you. To Kay, all of this seemed of no importance, as if it did not concern him, or at any rate did not bind him. But the self-importance of the teacher irritated him, and he said carelessly, "I know there are the usual duties." To wipe away the impression created by this remark, Frida inquired about the salary. "Whether there will be any salary," said the teacher, "will only be considered after a month's trial service." "But that is hard on us," said Frida. "We'll have to marry on practically nothing and have nothing to set up house on." "Couldn't you make a representation to the town council, sir, to give us a small salary at the start? Couldn't you advise that?" "No," replied the teacher, who continued to direct his words to Kay. "Representations to the town council will only be made if I give the word, and I shan't give it. The post has only been given to you as a personal favor, and one can't stretch a favor too far. if one has any consciousness of one's obvious responsibilities. Now Kay intervened at last, almost against his will. As for the favor, teacher, he said, it seems to me that you are mistaken. The favor is perhaps rather on my side. No, replied the teacher, smiling, now that he had compelled Kay to speak at last. I'm completely grounded on that point. Our need for a janitor is just about as urgent as our need for a land surveyor. Janitor, land surveyor, in both cases it's a burden on our shoulders. I still have a lot of trouble thinking out how I'm to justify the post to the town council. The best thing and the most honest thing would be to throw the proposal on the table and not justify anything. That's just what I meant, replied Kay. You must take me on against your will, although it causes you grave perturbation. You must take me on. But when one is compelled to take someone else on, and this someone else allows himself to be taken on, then he is the one who grants the favor. Strange, said the teacher. What is it that compels us to take you on? The only thing that compels us is the superintendent's kind heart, his too kind heart. I see, land surveyor, that you'll have to rid yourself of a great many illusions before you can become a serviceable janitor. And remarks such as these hardly produce the right atmosphere for granting of an eventual salary. I notice too, with regret, that your attitude will give me a great deal of trouble yet. All this time, I've seen it with my own eyes, and yet can scarcely believe it. You've been talking to me in your shirt and drawers. Quite so, exclaimed Kay with a laugh, and he clapped his hands. These terrible assistants, where have they been all this time? Frida hurried to the door. The teacher, who noticed that Kay was not longer to be drawn into conversation, asked her when she would move into the school. Today, said Frida. Then tomorrow I'll come to inspect matters, said the teacher, waved goodbye, and made to go out through the door, which Frida had opened for herself, but ran into the maids, who were already arriving with their things to take possession of the room again. And he, who made way for nobody, had to slip between them. Frida followed him. You're surely in a hurry, said Kay, who this time was very pleased with the maids. Had you to push your way in while we're still here? They did not answer, only twisted their bundles in embarrassment, from which Kay saw the well-known filthy rags projecting. So you've never washed your things yet, said Kay. It was not said maliciously, but actually with a certain indulgence. They noticed it, opened their hard mouths in concert, showed their beautiful animal-like teeth, and laughed noisily. Come along, said Kay. Put your things down. It's your room after all. As they still hesitated, however, the room must have seemed to them all too well transformed. Kay took one of them by the arm to lead her forward. but he let her go at once. So astonished was the gaze of both, which after a brief glance between them was now turned unflinchingly on Kay. "But now you've stared at me long enough," he said, repelling a vague, unpleasant sensation, and he took up his clothes and boots, which Frida timidly, followed by the assistants, had just brought in, and drew them on. The patience which Frida had with the assistants, always incomprehensible to him, now struck him again. After a long search, she had found them below peacefully eating their lunch. The untouched clothes, which they should have been brushing in the yard, crumpled in their laps. Then she had to brush everything herself, and yet she, who knew how to keep the common people in their places, had not even scolded them, and instead spoke in their presence of their grave negligence as if it were a trifling peccadillo, and even slapped one of them lightly, almost caressingly, on the cheek. Presently, Kay would have to talk to her about this, but now it was high time to be gone. "The assistants will stay here to help you with the removing," he said. They were not in the least bit pleased with this arrangement. Happy and full, they would have been glad of a little exercise. Only when Frida said, "Certainly, you stay here," did they yield. "Do you know where I'm going?" asked Kay. "Yes," replied Frida. "And you don't want to hold me back any longer?" asked Kay. "You'll find obstacles enough," she replied. "What does anything I say matter in comparison?" She kissed Kay goodbye, and as she had nothing at lunchtime, gave him a little packet of bread and sausage which she had brought for him downstairs, reminded him that he must not return here again, but to the school, and accompanied him, with her hand on his shoulder, to the door.